Okay, everybody, we're going to get started. I'm going to introduce our speaker. So this morning I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Kent Schafer. Kent is currently employed as the statewide psychologist and Region 2 therapist for the Office of Deaf Services within the Alabama Department of Mental Health. His predoctoral internship was served with rotations between the Sparks Pediatrics Clinic for Neurodevelopmental Disabilities at the University of Alabama at Birmingham and Bryce Psychiatric Hospital on the University of Alabama campus. He started out with his first master's in alcohol and substance abuse from the University of Illinois at Springfield, clinically treating substance use and challenging youth to think through prevention education. He transitioned to the educational side, earning his second master's degree in special education psychology from the University of Wisconsin at Whitewater. He continues to be a nationally certified school psychologist promoting the consultation collaboration model. Inside his circle, he is affectionately known as the research man, who enjoys disseminating strategies and decisions in designing interventions for the deaf. His doctoral dissertation focus was building psychometric value to Roger Williams and Charlene Crump's communication skills assessment to improve quality assessments for deaf individuals with a diagnosable mental illness. In the past, Kent has worked on numerous media-related projects for an executive agency in Illinois. He served as a parliamentarian for the Illinois Association for the Deaf during Michael Berger's term. As a current board-at-large member of the National Deaf Organization, ADARA, he continues to have a vested interest in addressing policy and program concerns to change practices for deaf behavioral health. He relishes opportunities to provide members of the receptive signing community the opportunity to expand the 6 inches of gray matter between their ears with over 100 presentations listed and still going strong. Outside the work sphere, Kent can be found somewhere chucking round plastic objects toward metal caged baskets in the sport called disc golf, or spending time with his wife and 2 daughters. So it's my pleasure to introduce Kent. I've heard him speak several times, and I just love his passion and his message. So let's welcome Kent.
Okay, is everyone good? Can you all hear the interpreter? I'm sorry, Morgan Freeman was not available today. First, I would like to know, by a show of hands, how many of you have encountered a deaf presenter before? Oh, we have several in here. Awesome. For me, one of the challenges is when I'm signing, I have to figure out how to give that information to the interpreter. So some words are very simple, easy, and clear. It's almost like peeling and eating a banana. It's easy, it's picture related, and it's easy to understand. Some words are very tough, like the word advocacy. It also means support. The sign means advocacy and support. So sometimes there are several words for a sign, or maybe 7 signs for one English word. So we're constantly going back and forth between those modalities. If something does not make sense or is not clear, please raise your hand and ask for clarification. I'm willing to go back, and we will get through this experience together. So for me, one thing is having the remote. I can't use the remote while I'm signing, so it's just easier for me to click. No, you're good, you're good. Another part is sometimes I'm signing so fast and the interpreter is trying to keep up. So when I have to click, that does give time for the interpreter to catch up. As you see here, we have 4 things. The first is the description of history. As a deaf person, I know more about the field of deafness, but the general community of disability, some areas I'm not familiar with. So I have made a personal investment to understand the general area of disabilities. So I'm hoping that some of you will join in that and start to research more about deafness. Last, you see language concerns. Sign language is a different sense compared to hearing and speaking. So you have to figure out how to get the information out. With Google, you can't translate sign language. Yesterday, we were blessed with a wonderful explanation of the history. One area that really touched me was institutions. I did go to an institution. I graduated from an institution. So how can we design the system based on deaf and hard of hearing at institutions? Back when I was in school, I had many teachers, staff, and professionals tell my parents that I would not succeed and be where I am today. Hopefully someday I can find those people and show them that I did become successful. So as far as history, in the 1950s, and for me, it really started back in the 1940s, when all the World War I, World War II was happening. There were a lot of able-bodied individuals going to another country. The system here in America, it needed help. So there were things like factories and manufacturers that needed help. So women and people that had a disability joined the workforce. They made rubber tires, cars, and other things that they would send over for the war. And that was really one of the best things that happened for deaf people, because it gave them the opportunity for jobs. It allowed them to work. And it gave them the opportunity to come together and socialize. There was some history in Akron, Ohio, for Goodyear factories. It was the first time deaf people were actually able to get together. And on nights and weekends, they would play sports for different leagues, and they did develop deaf sports. They developed deaf Olympic competitions, and at that point they realized, oh wow, deaf people can work and they can do things. So that really gave the opportunity to expand to education in other areas. When you think about public law, in 1973, they started vocational rehab. In the 1980s, in the 1990s, the Americans with Disability Act was established, and that really gave the opportunity for achievement. So as far as the law, you have to think about people, the people that are interacting with each other. And especially in Europe, the humanity approach gave recognition to help people with general disabilities. And then from Europe, it impacted Canada, British Columbia. The Pacific Northwest group, it then impacted Canada. And people recognize, oh, I like that philosophy. I like that approach. And then from there, it came to America and started to disperse from there. Americans finally begin to recognize we can support and we can encourage people that have a disability. On YouTube, you can find this video. So adults typically make decisions for people with a disability. People with a disability could not make a mistake. They could not make a choice to do something or do whatever they wanted to do. Parents or adults or professionals decided for them. So then people begin to realize no, and the attitudes begin to change. We need to let individuals with disabilities decide for themselves. If they do something dangerous or unsafe, that's their choice. You don't have to shelter or protect them from different opportunities. So that's what started to happen in 1974. People with disabilities started to say, no, this is about me. You can't decide for me. I can decide for myself. And that's where advocacy began to develop. You know, we can say what we want. I want to do this, or I can decide for myself. And that was really a powerful start to advocacy. So for me, when I look at the history of disabilities, one of the first case laws for me is June Rowley. She was a little girl that struggled for access to education. Her family did sign. They were able to communicate with her at home. However, when she went to school, she sat in silence. She could not access information and she struggled. Her family recognized it and requested interpreters. The school started providing interpreters and they noticed improvement. As soon as she started to show progress, they took away the interpreters. At night and on weekends, the parents had to try to catch her up as much as possible to keep her going. The school recognized that Amy continued to improve, so they didn't feel the need to provide interpreters. They said, oh, she's fine. She's succeeding. She's improving. She does not need interpreters. So the family filed a lawsuit against the school. The school and the parents went back and forth about providing access, providing sign language, providing interpreters, and the school continued to say she does not need that. It ended up going to Supreme Court. There's a phrase that often says, you don't need the Cadillac, you just need a Chevy. And that came from this. The court decided to give her the minimum. Not the best, just the minimum. The school just had to show some type of improvement. So Amy continued to struggle, looking for information. I can imagine the school system just providing a little bit. And that continues today in some areas. The school systems just provide a little bit. It's still a struggle. And it's very frustrating. For me as a student, when I was growing up, I needed interpreters. I needed that communication access, but I didn't get it. So I would improve and have to figure out other ways to access the information. So this is a very important case. She was able to get through it. She graduated and now has her PhD. She teaches in California now. You know, I just look back at the history of special education laws and all the lawsuits and experiences, and we're still struggling today. We have to realize it's people first. Amy's case, we needed quality interpreters, and that's the same today. We're not getting quality educational interpreters. You still see a post about deaf and hard of hearing students struggling today.
It was a perfect storm back in the 1960s. We had the women's rights movement, we had the civil rights movement, and the disabled people were able to join in on these movements. And the system recognized we needed to do more to provide services for the disabled community. And for me, one of the challenges was, how do we recognize the sensory experience? How do we recognize that? Because the system is still designed for spoken and auditory language. So how do we approach that issue? How do we provide all-inclusive access, sign language, maybe pictures? So we're still trying to figure out how to do that best for the nonverbal community. For me, as you can see, I'm a white man. I have no personal experience with transgender. I don't have any personal experience with that. And the challenge for me is trying to figure out how to advocate and how to recognize disability in general, to make it a universal application. Some things are very simple, like you think about wheelchair access for everyone. You set up ramps at schools, the school system, they do that, no problem. It's become a standard to have elevators at the schools, different buildings. But some things aren't as easy to see. Like if somebody has an internal disability, they're struggling maybe with attention or being fatigued all the time. We need to make sure that we're able to address challenges that specific people with disabilities go through. And we also have to ask and encourage others to join in. How do we teach the community in general? And how do we encourage people to be willing to collaborate and brainstorm ideas? I'm thinking back to when I was going for my first master's. And, I had to go to the audiologist. I had to prove that I was deaf. I had to get my audiogram. I had to get documentation to explain what I needed. I needed an interpreter. I needed to access the information in sign language. And, when the teacher, turned around and was writing on the board, that was very difficult for me. And I had to go through a lot to explain that. And they were okay with providing some, but not all. Some teachers were more willing to work with me than others. And so it was a real challenge for me to try to figure out how to get them, to get those things for me. And maybe I can't imagine, my disability and other people's disabilities, they're different. So I can't imagine, what somebody else with a disability needs. They're different from mine. So how do we, come together and try to support each other and advocate for each other in the mainstream? Because, it's often, there's one person here, one person there, and rarely do people with various disabilities get together and discuss their frustrations. So how do we step into that? And some of them keep quiet because of the stigma. So how do we get the teachers and the staff and the system in general to be willing and open to have that conversation and figure out how to provide those accommodations? So what was normal for the teacher was not normal for me, or maybe, it wasn't the normal for another person in the room. So we have to figure out how to bring all of that together and step into that and be willing to speak up. And we have to open up and explain who we are and, recognize and explain what we can and cannot do. And that kind of thing is very, very powerful for us to be able to take that first step and say, I'm here, I want access, I want to learn, I want to grow, I want the same opportunities as everybody else, but I can't do that if you all don't change your attitude. And when I finally decided to take that step and tell my story, it seemed to be stuck on the concept of what's right and what's wrong. So that was a challenge for me when I went ahead when I decided, to complain and say I wanted access. Who becomes the difficult one? I did. Because, I couldn't say, I was challenging what they thought was right, what they considered normal. So we definitely have a long road ahead of trying to change that culture, that idea. And we're sick of the phrase, we've always done it that way. So we have to figure out how to really convince people to be willing to stand up and say, this is how I'm being impacted. There are barriers that I'm trying to overcome. I've been through institutions, I've gone to mainstream school, I've gone to college, and I'm hopefully down the road one day other people with disabilities will also get there. So people with disabilities develop many different ways to solve problems. We look at things a different way. For example, during the pandemic that we've been experiencing the last couple of years, we've transitioned to remote learning. I've been doing remote learning for over 10 years. And I struggled, and it was difficult to convince other people of the positive things of remote learning. But now, when people were forced to do it, all of a sudden, there was a perspective change, and they thought, okay, obviously this does work. And, all of a sudden, I was able to explain things that I've been doing for years to these people who had just transitioned to online learning. I explained, the concepts behind polls, breakout rooms, different things that I had been doing for a while. And, some things, were a lot easier. For example, here in Alabama, we only have about 60 interpreters available over the whole state. So, it's a challenge to find interpreters. If you want one, you really have to plan ahead. You have to say, hey, are you available? Can we work this out? I can't just call, and say, hey, I need somebody tomorrow. It requires, planning ahead of time. And that's something that I'm used to. But with Zoom, all of a sudden there are so many more interpreters available, especially if they're doing it remote from other states. It provides way more opportunities to access interpreters, and that's an amazing resource that is now available. And again, some people with disabilities are already, kind of experts in those areas, but then when all of a sudden everybody was forced to do it, we kind of became the mentors in that field. So hopefully in the future, systems will start to recognize us as experts. Because I'm getting more and more pulled into cases similar to things that were mentioned yesterday during the presentation, like the Victor Wild boy. He was deprived of language, and we still see that happen every single day. We have kids who are 5, 6, who, show up to kindergarten and have no language. The parents don't know how to sign. Early intervention, encouraged them to speak and try to use, what hearing they had. And they were completely deprived of language. So, the kid turns 5 or 6 and they have, behavior issues. And the behavior issue becomes their behavior is how they communicate. It becomes their primary mode of communication. And so we have to figure out how to develop language at that time, or develop a way for them to make the connection that actions have consequences. And it's very difficult to explain that. And we see that more and more, where language deprivation, and that becomes language deprivation syndrome. So when you have just, the basic language deprivation, they're only getting the basic information of things they've never been taught before. But then when it becomes language deprivation syndrome, it can actually cause cognitive and emotional disabilities. So that's the challenge. We have to identify and separate the two. And if you don't, because they look almost exactly the same. So you can see here I have 2 columns. The first one is pathological, and that's a word that that's used often by medical professionals. And then over to the right you have cultural, and that's used in cultural linguistics. And kids who are deaf and hard of hearing, when they're first born, from a medical perspective, the first thing that, the parents hear is, "I'm sorry, your son or your daughter has a disability. Sorry." They don't, medical professionals, they don't say, "Wow, congratulations, you're in for a very special journey. There's going to be some challenges. There's going to be some, amazing moments." You never see medical professionals doing that, because they're stuck in this left-hand column. And that's where you, the audience here, you have to bring the right-hand column and kind of show them how to recognize and how to do that. There are different ways to look at things, and that's just amazing.
For individuals who have disabilities, sometimes it's tough to advocate for yourself and say what you like and what you don't like and what you will accept. It can be tough. We are not taught how to officially advocate for ourselves. We're not taught about the social expectations of the privileged culture and how to satisfy them. When we do speak up and develop some type of confidence for ourselves, and decide to step in is often interpreted as we're being egotistical. It's a challenge to figure out how to communicate and convince people. It's about my life, my experience, and what I want to do, instead of what other people expect me to do. If I had listened to my teachers in elementary school, I would be stuck in some type of low-wage job, and I would not be as successful as I am today. I would let them know if I disagreed. I spent a lot of time in detention. And I was okay with that because I wanted more. So my school really focused on speech therapy with me. They did not care about trying to teach me math, science, history. They were only focused on having me speak phrases. If I could speak a phrase, that was all they cared about. That was what mattered. Other subjects didn't matter, like reading. I wanted to be involved in reading. I wanted history. I wanted to figure out how to problem solve. But instead, they were focused on having me speak. It was really a challenge, but lucky for me, my parents were wonderful, and they realized my desire for other things, so they supported my journey. They found other adults who said, no, he doesn't have to speak. He can learn how to sign. And that was really impactful. None of us have like a simple list of what's legally required, of laws and expectations and rules. We don't have a fancy official list. We had to learn from our own mistakes and struggles. Schools don't provide a specialized list. They often get in a confrontation and just try to provide the bare minimum. As someone mentioned, some schools, they're willing to invest in some schools are willing to invest more in their football team instead of students. So for this, I tried to pick a few notable people that I would like to thank. They are pioneers in this field. I have Justin Dart. His family owned Walgreens, so there was a lot of money to support him in his journey. He traveled all around the USA, really advocating and stepping in and explaining about disability access. He used a wheelchair, and he was very frustrated with the system. He was friends with the Bush family, so they collaborated and had many discussions and began to recognize the opportunity to help other people who had a disability. That really gave him the opportunity to step in and have support from his family. Family money and politics came together, and he was able to start the ADA. The ADA is a great tool. It's a great system that helps people overall. There are still some struggles with certain individuals. Haben Girma is deafblind. She was the first person to get into Harvard and fight for her rights for accommodations and access. You had the good old boys club set up, and they were not willing to provide much. She went back and forth with them. She would not give up, and she made it. So you think about those struggles and those frustrations, They went through the same thing, and we're still going through it today. We're still having to fight. You can't give up. Here you have Thomas Edison. He did have a hearing loss, so he figured out different things to help him. When it becomes dark, you can't read lips. You can't see things, and if you have a hearing loss, you can't really distinguish things. So he developed the light bulb. So now I can see better. I can read lips. We have that light to see communication. So again, people with different types of disabilities developed technology that's great tools for all of us. So like today with the smartphones. Now you can speak into a smartphone and it translates, so I can understand what people are saying. Someone invented that, and it's a wonderful tool. Ed Roberts. People with disabilities were very isolated. So Ed wanted to pull everyone together because there is strength in numbers. So you have people with disabilities that are coming together in numbers to advocate for themselves. And that's very powerful. Sometimes when you feel like you're fighting alone, just look around. There are more people involved in that fight. We have to come together because, again, there is strength in numbers. So when we are able to come together and file complaints, we can make improvements. So I see a lot of systematic issues. I see people thinking, and you have to convince them to think about changing their approach, their ideas, and in the discussions, you need to include individuals that have a disability. So there's an English phrase that says, I do it to people with disability, or I do it for people with a disability, or I do it with people who have a disability. We need more people that are willing to consider the word with. We don't need people that are trying to decide our best interest for us. We don't need people to do it for us. We need people to come together with us. When you think about the word with, it's a different type of support. It's a simple word, but it's a different type of support. I cannot tell you how many buildings are designed without people that don't include people that have a disability on their team. When I arrived to the University of Alabama 5 years ago as a PhD student, they had fire alarm systems set up. And I'm pretty sure it's the same thing here, but I'm not sure where the flashing lights are for the fire alarms. So now I'm curious if there was a person on the team that had a disability. So for me, when I look at fire alarms, I look to see if it has a flashing light. Then I have to figure out if it has a flashing light, does that mean to stay in or leave? Sometimes it's the same. It may be for a fire or a tornado. So when it's flashing, I have to kind of look around and see what's going on. I have to look at people to see what they're doing. If they're running, that means I follow. If they stay, that means I stay. It's frustrating. I wish that when they were designing buildings, they would include people with disabilities. You could set up 2 or 3 different color lights. So one means stay, another color means leave. That would be really nice, but they don't include us when they're designing buildings. School systems. They don't set up communication for deaf individuals. Most of the time it's an intercom. What are we supposed to do with that? Is it the voice of God? So those types of things are frustrating. We have to think about different ways to include us when developing systems. They can include individuals with disabilities on the planning committee and other different areas, and that would make such a huge impact for us. What was that last part? Oh. Do any of you recognize any of these? Okay, I have some hands. The girl with the red headband, which one do you recognize? This one? What impact did it have for you?
It really brought into focus the disability movement, the reason why the movie Crip Camp became so popular, and what we still have to do in the future.
Okay, great. Anyone else? I think I saw someone raise their hand. Anyone notice something different?
For me, Crip Camp made people realize that people with disabilities are funny. They have such a great sense of humor, and I think so often, that doesn't get highlighted. And Crip Camp just made it so real and fun. Just really, made it real and normal. It was normalized for me.
Okay. Anyone else? Anyone else raising their hand?
Crip Camp, so I know a little about self-advocacy and history for disabilities, but
I'm sorry, can you speak up just a little bit?
yeah, so Crip Camp, I've known a little bit about the history of people with disabilities and struggle for advocacy, but just, if I remember correctly, like crawling on the steps of the,
You can't hear me at all. So Crip Camp, when I watched it, I've known a little bit about the self-advocacy movement and the difficulties, but just showing how inaccessible things were and how, like you're saying, just the basic supports had to be fought for and fought for again and fought for again. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Can you raise your hand?
I could say like Crib Camp, because I seen a documentary on Netflix. I could say this seemed really wonderful and outstanding. To teach people how to self-advocate for themselves, what we can or cannot do. I know I've been watched Netflix a long time. I could say that this documentary is so very outstanding. It's so how people get involved, how we connect with more people, who we are.
Anyone else? Thank you. That's all the comments? Okay, for me, Crip Camp was not a new thing. We have deaf camps. And we've had several youth leadership camps. We've also had several churches that provide camps for the deaf as well. It's always inspiring for me because I grew up isolated. When I went to college, I was isolated. At the University of Alabama, there are 38,000 students. I was the only one who was culturally deaf. For me, that type of experience of going to a camp and having that social interaction, being able to come together with other people who use sign language, it was a wonderful experience. Often, it's hard to leave. You spend your nights up all night just communicating and interacting. You really want to stay, but you have to go back to the real world. So to actually see that and have a documentary to show the different experiences and the various disabilities, the disabilities didn't matter. It was about having fun. So to overcome that barrier, it's wonderful. You know, there are jokes and other things that we never think of before, that we've never thought of before. You know, we would just get together and laugh. There are more here, like Crip Hop. So it's disabilities integrated with music. I thought it was really cool. I couldn't hear them, so I don't know if they're any good. But based on the inspiration, the motivation, the dance moves, the choreography, it was wonderful. It was really inspiring, and it showed different ways to incorporate different things. There are so many different stories, books, articles that are available, so I just picked a few. The more I read, the more I consider that you have to consider that roughly 1 in 5 people have some type of disability. It can be something that you can't see, like anxiety or depression, or it can be something obvious, like some type of physical issue. We have to figure out how to come together and appreciate the diversity. For me, one of the challenges, and I don't know about you all, but one challenge is going to church. I cannot tell you how many times they have tried to save me or try to cure me. I don't want to be hearing. I want to go to a place where everyone signs. When I see songs like Amazing Grace that want to restore everyone back to the dominant culture instead of joining our culture, it's difficult. We have to figure out how to convince the dominant culture that we're okay. Come into our world. Come understand us. Also, I think about some of the words that we use, our word choice. Like, is it a noun or is it a verb? As you see here, resilience. When I think about the noun perspective, I think about people that are trying to protect us and decide for us. When it's a verb, then it becomes about me being able to say what I want. I'm the captain of my own ship. we have to figure out how we can come to a consensus about how to help people, how we can join together.
I just have here a few different pictures of me, different things that I've encountered on my journey over the years. This one here is at the University of Alabama. They had a sports team, and I actually joined the team. And we went to the Southeastern College Championship, and we did pretty well. We actually won the first flight group. We won. I mean, I had 3 people on the team that could hear. I was the only deaf, and we had to figure out how to communicate with each other, how to work together to make it through, and it was a really great experience. And one thing for me is stepping onto a new campus. You know, I have to actually go to the police department, introduce myself, say hello, gesture that, hello, I am deaf, because unfortunately police do still shoot deaf people today. You know, they say stop or I'll shoot, and I can't hear that, so I'll just keep walking. So it's dangerous. So I have to go in, introduce myself, make sure they know what I look like, tell them I'm deaf. And so that, there needs to be some kind of training, workshops, articles to explain that, their tactics are not accessible. They don't work for people who can't hear. I had to go into the school newspaper and introduce the concept of disabilities. Because, newspapers like articles, they like print. And we have to go in, and try to open up their mind, work together. And so you can see here, I have a picture of one of the print that came out. And so, I had to say what you've been doing all along is not going to work for me. I've traveled all over America, presented different workshops, and the concept of training teachers, interpreters, and the community in general. You have to think about redesigning education for the deaf and hard of hearing. For the past 100 years, what we've been doing is not working. They try to teach this. They focus on spoken language. They focus on hearing, and that doesn't work for individuals like me. We need visual. We need pictures, gestures, actions, and that's accessible, because the ball is very big. That on your lips, I don't know, that does not, I can't make a connection to that. But if you do this here, I can see it. I can see that on your mouth. I can see your facial expression, and that is language. It's not perfect. It's not perfect sign language, but it's some way to connect, to build that bridge, and that's really a powerful thing for children. It was for me. And so for some reason, Alabama actually gave me an award. I don't know. Somebody recognized me, and here I am getting the award. I don't know. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Y'all are all quiet. Oh, there's one.
Where's the little lapel mic?
In teaching language, foreign language to children and others, if we were to make sign mainstream, what age would that be best taught? Should it be a high school second language as like Spanish or Korean or whatever, or should it be taught age 5 forward? Does that make sense?
Okay, so that's actually a two-part question. So the first question is when to teach it. And I always say as early as possible. I mean, start them young. The brain is, the brain plasticity is, they're like sponges. They soak up everything. The second part of your question is actually a cultural issue. Like, for example, teaching some areas in Korean. A lot of us, we don't know anything about that. The Oxford English Dictionary just added 20 Korean concepts to the dictionary, just added this year. So we still have a lot of learning to do to understand specific words, specific concepts, and things that have cultural value. So like I said, you want to teach them young, specific words, make sure that they understand that, and then it transfers over how to understand phrases, concepts, and the value based on the culture. So that's something that we have to work together to develop. And another challenge on my end is taking the English that is not direct and taking it and making it into sign language. With sign language, we use a lot of 3D things. We use our signing space. We use facial expressions. And, often we use our face to provide some kind of adjective. Whereas English, you just, there's a word. You put a word in front of another word. And it's linear. It's 2D print. It's that kind of information. And, the imagination runs wild. So hopefully, does that answer your question? Oh, where'd the mic go? Oh, there it is.
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for coming and speaking to us.
You're welcome.
My nephew is deaf, and our family has experienced the lack of access to quality translators. And as a default, family members become his translator at every event. What recommendations do you have for kind of tapping into available resources for quality translators? Because it's been a real struggle for us.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty huge question. Okay, the first recommendation I have is try to convince the community at large to learn sign language. I can't even imagine, if an entire town or an entire island full of people who knew how to sign gesture. And I'm thinking about other countries that, they don't speak the same language and it often overlaps. How do they develop the ability to communicate with each other? That's the kind of attitude that we need. We have to figure out a way to make that connection and understand each other. And so, here in America, right now in Alabama, we only have one program for the entire state that provides interpreter training, just one. So how do we grow more programs? That's more of a long-term goal. I'm hoping with the University of Alabama, I can convince them to establish a second interpreter training program, a deaf studies program. I'm hoping to get ASL recognized as a foreign language there so that we can grow more. There's a huge demand out there, but not a lot of people who are willing to actually do the work and develop the skill. So that is a huge challenge for us. Each state has different agencies, different referral agencies. You know, they have different people that they know that they're able to contact, and the challenge often becomes, like, people think that interpreters are one size fits all. You know, this interpreter can interpret anything and everything, and that is not true. You know, there are certain areas of expertise that has certain jargon and concepts that need to be conveyed. So you can't pull in, you know, a social worker to do a serious operation to remove somebody's organ. And so for some reason, people think that, you know, if we know two languages, they're able to go back and forth in those two to do anything. But unfortunately, you know, we need interpreters that are trained in that field. I'm sorry, are you in Alabama? Okay. So my first recommendation would be to start with Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind, to get in touch with them. That would be the first step in finding interpreting services. If there's anybody in here from another state, you can also feel free to contact me and I can refer you to another agency. Oh, I'm getting the cut it.
Oh, thank you, Kent.
And, you know, this is my contact information. Feel free to get in touch with me.